Come on, don't you die on me. I think it's permanent. Welcome to another Inside with IAIS. My name's Griffin, and today we're going to be talking about black walnuts, and specifically, making dye with black walnut fruit. Black walnuts produce fruit, not necessarily even every year, but will produce their fruit around this time of year, which is kind of the end of September, beginning of October. You'll kind of see them on the ground a lot of times. They look a little bit like a pear and a lime kind of had a child. They're very, very fragrant. Like if you nick one and smell it, it's a very strong smell. Be careful when nicking them though, because one of the features of these fruit is actually the outer pulp of the nut that's on the inside actually makes a very good dye. The dye itself was used by native people for staining wood and dyeing clothing. It would also, however, be useful as a food item, the nut in the middle, because it keeps for a very long time, especially for winter time when you have less food availability. The nut was actually a very good thing to eat as well. Today, when handling the fruit, if there's going to be any punctures or breaks in the kind of fleshy outer part of the black walnut, you are going to want to wear gloves, because the stain, the yellow juice that comes out of this when it's fresh, will actually stain your hands very quickly, and it's very hard to get it off. It will be there for a very long time. Even though the juice is yellow, it will eventually oxidize to brown or black, depending on how much of it you were exposed to. Fresh can be used for dye, but also old and weathered ones can be used for dye. Even though they're kind of black and crumbly and dried out, you can still use the outer portions of these. So today, when we do make dye, we're going to be making dye with a combination of both, but you could use one or the other. Often a fresh husk is easier to remove after giving a good whack with a stone or on a rock or something like that. So you can kind of pop off the outside covering of the walnut and then peel that off, and you can put it into a container. Now, if a person in this area 1,000 years ago was making walnut dye, they'd often do it in a pot, potentially something like a soapstone bowl. Nowadays, we're just going to use a metal pot. Be careful what you use. You're not going to want to use something that you don't want stained. After you've collected enough husks, what you want to do is cover the husks about just over them with some water and let it boil. You can boil for a really long time if you don't have a lot of material. You don't have to boil for very long at all if you have a lot of material. This dye is very strong. You won't need a ton of it, but as I said, the less material you have, the longer you'll have to let it boil. After it's been boiling for a little bit, you'll start to notice there's a change in the coloration. Especially if you're using fresh stuff, it'll look a little bit like soy sauce at first, but once it's been boiling for about half an hour or so, it will often just be black. So when you're done, you should end up with a very deep coloration of the liquid in there. Now this will be your dye, and it can be quite strong. In order to store the liquid that you've made, one of the things you can do is put it in mason jars, or put it in even like milk jugs is fine. You want to let it cool off, just in case it can get kind of hot. Glass can crack, and plastic, of course, can melt when exposed to too much heat. But one of the things that can be helpful as well is using like a coffee filter in order to strain out the chunks so you just get the dye. Thank you for joining us for another Inside with IAIS. We do these videos bi-weekly, so tune in 2 weeks to see another. And if you feel like contributing to the museum itself, make sure to check online or visit us in person, and you can donate to help us produce more content like this.